have to paste it. Hi, everybody. I'm Cathy Hailey, Vice President of the Northern Region of the Poetry Society of Virginia. And manning the chat and Zoom, we have Steve Bucher of the North Central Region. We're continuing our series, Virginia Voices, with a new focus, but still celebrating PSV's centennial year with monthly readings. The intention is to remember why we came together in PSV in the first place, to share how we as individuals approach poetry, and to connect with our community statewide. In this year, which we began in June, our goal is to bring together the poetic voices of established poets and youth or young adult poets, beginning with our young poets in the community who are new PSV members. Episodes featuring 2 PSV members are held on Zoom at 5:30 p.m. on the second Wednesday of each month. We ask the same 3 questions and ask featured poets to read 3 poems. Today, we feature Zoe Brenner and Eric Forsbergh. And I'll start by introducing Zoe, who is a 14-year-old and who started attending high school this past fall. She likes to write poetry, create music, travel the world, and play sports. You might have noticed she was standing in front of the Eiffel Tower on the flyer. As a PSV young poet in the community, she held Poetry Con at Benton Middle School. She has been published 1 time for her poetry in the Manassas Weekly magazine. When she isn't writing, she can be found playing the violin or guitar and running cross country and track for Colgan High School. Go Sharks. I'll go ahead and introduce Eric, and then we'll begin the questions with Zoe. Eric Forsbergh has had nearly 100 poems published in venues such as the Journal of the American Medical Association, Streetlight, the Cafe Review, the Journal of Neurology, and the Northern Virginia Review. He has twice won the Edgar Allan Poe Memorial Prize from the Poetry Society of Virginia. His second poetry book has just been released on the subject of DNA and its implications for ancestry and family. The book is titled This Mortal Coil, after Shakespeare. Can you see that? He is a Vietnam veteran and has participated in medical missions in Guatemala and Appalachia. In 2022, he graduated with a master's certificate in social justice from a majority Black seminary, the John Leland Institute in Arlington, Virginia. Okay. So we're going to start with you and ask you if you would read your first poem.
I'll go ahead and read my first poem. It's entitled Songbird. The euphonious hum of running creek water. Mother Nature's lobelia eyes look upon mine. Flower buds reaching out, ready to burst in joy. Sing me your soulful hymn, my young songbird. Pleasure my ear with your honey-filled sound. Can you not hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I just saw the chat out there. I'll read the second verse. Sing me your soulful hymn, my young songbird. Pleasure my ear with your honey-filled sound. Moss emerging from strong oaks, grasping the ridges in the wood, radiant waves peek through the trees. Skin tingling from the wind, running her hands on my arms, yet I'm still warm from the beauty of the natural earth. Songbirds chirp and fill my ears with powerful yet anxious orotund hymns. Leaves hissing as I step, feeling the stems on my bare feet, roots tripping me when I pass. I can feel it now. I feel the rush of wind and water. I feel the bumpiness of the trees' roots, planting them into our earth. Hearing the crow of a soft songbird, I raise my bent finger it sits perched, singing me our last hymn. And peace.
That's really nice, and I really like how you use so many different senses and included imagery that was really unique, but also that you had a direct address to the songbird, that you switched into that in the middle stanza.
Thank you. It was actually very a dramatized time of when I tripped on a root and fell. So that's literally what inspired it.
That's incredible. Such beauty from difficulty, from challenge, right?
Cathy, if I might interrupt for a moment.
Yes.
I just want to encourage everyone to please use the chat for comments with regard to the poetry you're hearing. It is very valuable to the poets to look at it later on because they really can't focus on it while they're reading. But the feedback is really good. If there's a particular line or passage that you think is really powerful and effective, please let the poet know.
Thank you for that reminder. And at this point also, let's remind everybody to mute their microphones if they are not one of the two featured poets. And so I'll start with a question, not necessarily in the answer that, in the order that we gave them to you, but I'd like to have you talk about sort of your approach to poetry. What kinds of poetry you like to write? What inspires you? Sometimes you might have to create inspiration, not necessarily just wait till something challenging happens, like tripping over a root. So, how do you go about that?
My personal approach to poetry is very unorganized and chaotic. Usually around this time, I more or less go and I write poetry when I feel like it, which I'm starting to make more of a habit of trying to make a schedule when I write poetry. My process in writing poetry is quite sporadic. I don't ever have a set time when I write and revise, although I'm starting to implement one. I kind of write it wherever. I used to write it in a specific notebook at my desk, but now I write it on my phone. I've written it on schoolwork. I've written it on a desk at one point, got in trouble for that. So I stopped doing that. A lot of my poems I have a certain rhythm to it, either on the guitar, violin, or piano. That's how those instruments help me create not only music but poetry, because I can put, like, that songbird poem, I have like chords to that on a guitar probably. And I'm always looking for ways to expand my vocabulary and utilize unique words whenever I craft a poem, because I love using words that you wouldn't hear in an everyday conversation because it just sounds so beautiful in poetry.
Wow, lots of great things that you're experimenting with, and I encourage you to try to write as often as you want to or can. But I also want to say that lots of famous published poets are also a bit sporadic and chaotic with their process. So so there are people who get up a certain time every morning and get started. It's a little hard to write in the morning when you have to be at school at 7 a.m. though, right?
That's very true. And I have English my first class, so that makes it even harder.
I see. Okay. Eric, would you read your first poem?
Sure. So this is a book about DNA. So it's in three parts. The first part describes the science of DNA, which I'll go on with this poem. Again, I often like to use words that not everyone hears every day. This is a scientific term, so I would expect not many people would know it anyway. The poem is entitled Telomere, which is defined as the tip on every chromosome. It's like a shoelace tip, for example, and a lot of it depends on how long we live. The poem goes like this. How many mornings more to roll from bed? How many times to climb the hill? And to be blunt, how many soirees overstayed before your body summons the disgust to throw the book at you? The telomere, a ticket taker, collects a chit from every cell on the toll road to replacement. It keeps the timetable strict Barring intervention from the scheduler, it decides when you leave the station, laid out in the mail car, on time or well before. It's known to be punctilious and tears off extra chits if you strew garbage through your house. Strolling leisurely along La Grande Jatte, you want to lengthen out the count. You whisper to the river, slow yourself. You invent an endless sunny day to kiss someone you love. After all, how efficient could these ticket takers be? Consider this a parallel. Each 10 years, every ounce of bone you're hung upon, spine, skull, scapula, has been replaced. Its chit book spent, each cell line in you dies. In the beginning, painted by a pointillist, now thrown into reverse, you and I will disappear by dots.
Wow, I really like the way you bring that to a close with the pointillism and looking at the dots and disappearing into them. That's a really beautiful poem, and I feel like it's one I might need to read more than once to follow all of what I'm learning from it. But the images are great, and the confluence of language from different subjects, I enjoyed that as well.
Right. Yeah, one of my fans said, yeah, she read the poem about 2 or 3 or 4 times just to kind of soak it up a little bit more.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your approach or approaches to poetry. Clearly in this book, you have a number of different things that you're doing, but there's also a kind of thematic overriding idea. But I know I've read many other poems that don't have anything to do with DNA and aren't even necessarily scientific, right?
Right. Well, I enjoyed what Zoe said about sporadic and chaotic for a while, and my wife was asking me about this. She goes, honey, what are these sticky notes that you leave all over the house? I really was. I would write a phrase and stick it somewhere, and she'd collect them and bring them to me or say, Eric, pick them up. And then I got smart and I started writing poetry on my phone, you see, so there we go. If I lost my phone, I'd have a lot of prompts missing. But anyway, I do, one of the most important things, I try to read. That's how it helps me. So for instance, I read a lot of other people's poetry. I read essays on poetry. I read the classics. I figure if the classics had it figured out, then that's a place to go. I just finished the Iliad and the Odyssey, and now I'm just now starting again on the Iliad and the Odyssey in a brand new translation by a woman named Emily Wilson, the first woman to translate. And it's a different experience, I promise you. So I do write every day, just about every day. I may sit down and only change a phrase or two, but sometimes I'll come out with a whole new poem. And I generally tend to work on my poems in batches. So like 6 at a time. And the reason I say 6 is that typically I'm going to do 3 for one journal and 3 for another. Typically journals will take 3 at a time. And so I want to be able to kind of nibble away at those. And my favorite part of all poetry is the revision. And oftentimes I will revise, I'll go back into that poem. Oh, I mean, I've had poems that I've sat on for 5 years before I thought they were ready. I've had other poems that I almost came out of the gate just about perfect, but I love the revision process. When you put it aside and come back to it, then the shortcomings just really stand out.
Yeah, and sometimes it really allows you to see in a new way and add a whole different element or perspective to it.
Right. The other thing I think it's really important is the presentation of poetry. This goes back to the oral tradition. I mean, Homer spoke in the oral tradition. The Black community is famous for speaking in the oral tradition, and they memorize their poems, which is something I may not have the brain power to do, but the thing is, it just so impresses me. And so these poems that I've got today, I've read them each over a dozen times aloud just to make sure I had them, because my goal is not to make a single verbal slip in the hall of the reading. And having said that, I probably will do it on the next poem.
I understand that. Sometimes it's embarrassing if you forget how the punctuation and lineation works in your own poem, and that word is hanging out there on the next line, and you kind of have to go back to say it right.
Yep.
Neil would like to know, how about Seamus Heaney's Beowulf? Have you read that?
Oh my heavens, no, but I need to, because Seamus Heaney is like digging through rich earth. In fact,
Absolutely.
he has a line where he talks about using his pen to dig through rich Irish soil. And I have to add that to my list, Neil.
And he's also asking if you've heard Martin Luther King's recitation of Mother to Son, which is gorgeous.
I have not. No, I'm going to write that
Okay,
down.
got another on your list. Actually, you can save the chat at the end. We encourage all of
Oh
you.
yeah, okay, fine. That's good. I'll
Because
come back
there'll
to
be
it.
some things, but I just thought in case there was something you wanted to comment on that I'd ask
Sure.
now. Okay, so I really appreciate your enthusiasm for revision. As a teacher for many years, that's one of the things that's difficult, I think, to get people to appreciate at a young age, especially with poetry, because there's some kind of myth out there that, you know, inspiration comes, flows out, arrives on the paper, and, you know, touching it is a crime. I'm glad to have you as an illustration of that not being the case.
Yeah.
All right. So you've just been made a member of Poetry Society of Virginia after spending time as a young poet in the community last spring. And, you know, I wondered if you'd like to talk about what, you know, how you're being young poets in a young poet in the community affected your, you know, last semester of middle school, how your teachers responded to that, maybe a little bit about your project, which I enjoyed being a part of.
Definitely. First, what prompted to join the Young Poets in the Community program was my 7th grade teacher, Mr. Dunn. Although I was in 8th grade, I still kept contact, which most of you guys know him, this John Dunn. He hosts Spilding. He's an amazing teacher. He's really awesome. And my mentor was my 8th grade language arts teacher, Mr. Vincent. He recently moved to Pennsylvania, which is really sad because I don't get to visit him. But he's a really awesome teacher. He's definitely one of my top favorites, along with Mr. Dutton. And he knew I was into writing and especially poetry. He got me my publication, actually, my first publication. And he knew I'd be interested in this. So he handed me a packet and said, write. So I wrote and I submitted it. And I was like, I don't know if I'll get this or not because it's a big state thing. And then I got the email and I was like, wow. And I got a feature in the school newsletter, which I mean, some people read, some people don't. Most teachers do. So I got little like shout outs from teachers. And then my original project didn't go as planned. It was supposed to have like a poetry corner in each newsletter, which didn't work out because we didn't have enough time in the year. So we ended up to this event called PoetryCon, and it was where I invited teachers that were provided to me by Miss Hailey and some other amazing poets in the Northern Virginia area that would be interested in coming and helping me like teaching. And I emailed about, I think, maybe 15 of them, and we had 7 or 8, I think maybe 9 come out. And I hosted the event on a Friday, I think a Thursday or a Friday, so it wouldn't be like too packed and crazy. And I set up all the tables in the cafeteria. All the teachers came in, and I waited like 15 minutes, and no one came. But it's okay because I still had a really fun time because Miss Hailey had everyone start writing poetry on her ekphrastic poetry lesson, which I love that lesson so much. It's one of my favorites. And I mean, I was just so busy my last semester of middle school because I was on the girls' soccer team, which I don't play soccer anymore, but I played for my middle school. And I was busy like the whole time. I had practice every day. I had 2 games a week. And then I had my extracurricular soccer, extracurricular instruments, all that. So it was really busy. So I kind of like rushed it into 1 month, and I was like, okay, I'll plan everything 1 month, then do it the next month. But I mean, it ended up working. I still had a lot of fun, even though no one showed. And I'm just very thankful that I have this opportunity to be a Poetry Society of Virginia member, and that I got to host that event.
And it really was wonderful because although students didn't show, I just handed Zoe the bag of artwork, and she'd already been in one of my workshops in the past. So she led the workshop, and all of the teachers who were planning to teach participated and shared their work multiple times. So it was actually quite enjoyable, and I think everybody wrote some things that they were proud of. So would you like to do your second poem?
I would love to. And what's funny, it's based off of chapter 12 or chapter 13 of the Odyssey. And I was like, no one's read the Odyssey recently, so I hope Eric understands what I'm trying to go for here. It's like I wrote it based off of that. It was for an assignment in school. I didn't end up submitting it, so it's kind of like a twisted version of it. So it's not completely it, but I tried my best. It's called The Witches. The pattering of footsteps entering their tavern, eyes bright, wondering where they shame. Enticing they are, the witch's eyes, nature-filled orbs with honey mixed in. Reaching out her disguised hand, they went in and out with their souls. They devoured the meaty porridge set out for them, unaware of their surroundings. More, more, they pleaded. The witches crack a grin and give in to the greedy guests. One stuffed to the last button of their shirt. The porridge takes its toll and lulls them to sleep. Surrounded by pig taxidermies, leather jackets, and a meat grinder, what seemed like these beautiful stout women were far from that. Once awoke, they will see that humans they no longer be. You are what you eat, the witches exclaim. The guests are startled as they start to shrink and grow bigger ears and start to snort. The guests, now animals, squeal and flail as the witches snarl. Suddenly, the leather couch isn't as comfortable as once before.
Wow, that's wonderful. Eric, oh, I'm sorry. I muted myself. Sorry about that. Anyway, I just was going to say that was wonderful. And Eric, if you'd like to make a quick comment, since you were requested to consider the Odyssey, please.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I'm very impressed, and I really love a couple of her lines, and I think, and even some of the language was a little bit shocking, which I think is a great thing. So, Zoe, I think this poem really stands out to me. It's
Thank you
something.
so much.
Some of the lineage was really quite unexpected, and the line about, oh, where was it? Nature-filled orbs with honey mixed in.
Yeah,
really nice. That's really nice.
I agree. Beautiful job. So, Eric, would you like to read a poem next, or go ahead with the PSV question?
I'll read another poem.
Okay.
So I just wanted to, in this book, there is a trajectory, as I said, from the science of DNA into the whole issue of family. But what comes in the middle, of course, as we know, is we usually call love. And so, when you're in that process, you move from science almost into spirituality, because I think what I'm trying to reach for in this book is the sanctity of human life. And so, and I mean, if you have a child or a spouse or a grandchild, it's about the sanctity of their life. And so I consider that to be, I'm never dismissive of any of the characters in my poetry, never. And so I think it's really important to uphold human sanctity. And so anyway, so in the middle part of the book, there are some love poems, and so this poem, all my love poems are actually to my wife, and it's called. And the problem with a love poem is you really don't want to make it mawkish or sentimental. So here goes. What you said about me. The first 2 sips of beer are the best, you tease good-naturedly as we huddle on a second date, the dark eddy of a railway station bar. First, foam annoys the upper lip, then bubbles bristle in the throat. On brew, the stomach bloats, but oh, those first 2 drafts. A river of passengers flows by, head on toward destinations, delays, sidetracks, cancellations. How we like to overlay our futures onto those of passers-by, guessing at their plunges into rapids, cascades, often jutting rocks, hoping for a pool of calm. How are they a match? You laugh. A season on, and now you banter with me smilingly. Maybe this is more like wine, slow to unfold complexity in the us we're tasting every day.
Again, I turn to the ending and say how beautiful that is when you introduce the wine. And I love that it's juxtaposed against beer, which I also love. So, for the record. Beautiful. Thank you so much. And Eric, tell us about your joining PSV and what kinds of things you've been involved with since you've joined and how it's helped you or affected you in any way.
Well, I think the important thing was I found a community of like-minded people, a community of other poets. You don't find poets just walking down the street all the time. We know that. And so being in the Poetry Society, I got introduced to a lot of people. I was in a contest about 10 years ago, and Carolyn Kreider-Ferranda was the judge, and I did well in the contest. And then I started asking about the Poetry Society, and I got really involved. So I started entering their contest every year. So I've been to a lot of readings and the annual event, and then the 100-year, that's the centennial in Richmond last year. I worked the tables there, helping out to try to make it all go. And I also took a couple of really outstanding workshops. There was one where we could use our own poetry and mix it in with some lines from other famous Virginia poets, and called Blended Voices, and that book just came out. So the great thing is, and we've also created a salon. So we have a Northern Virginia salon. In our salon, we have about 6 or 8 people, and it's really good. Those people help me make this a better book, because in the salon, they know a lot of these poems. They help to edit them and polish them and make them better and point out the shortcomings. So I guess I'm deeply grateful to the Poetry Society for, and also the camaraderie of it, to be honest with you. So I guess that would be my answer.
Yeah, I agree with you that that's one of the best reasons to join. And, even with the pandemic, we were able to make community through Zoom. In fact, this event, Virginia Voices, was thought up by Angela Dribbin just because of the need for community and the need to remember why we were in this organization together, that it wasn't just about having business meetings and making plans for future events, but that we actually needed to make connections as poets and get to know, who each person is in terms of their poetry and their personalities, et cetera, rather than just whether they're parliamentarian of the meeting or chairman of this committee. So thank you for also bringing up the Centennial Festival, which I thoroughly enjoyed as well. And we spent so much time planning. It was really nice to see it happen. And even though I would have loved to have had more people, all the people that were there seemed to enjoy what they saw, what they experienced, and there was a lot of inspiration for writing, I think, both during the workshops and just looking back and thinking about the poems you heard and getting ideas for your own new work. So I'm gonna go back to Zoe, and so this is going to be the follow-up PSV question and then a third poem. But I do want to just mention to you both, we might have time for more than one other poem. So, just like when you're not on, take a minute to look and see if you have another poem that you would like to read, maybe one or two even. So it's possible that you'll have time for more. It always just depends on how much time people spend answering questions. So, as you just heard, we celebrated our centennial. So the Poetry Society of Virginia began in 1923. And so we're nearing the end of 23, but we're going to continue this past the end of the year. It was exciting knowing and thinking back and hearing poetry from people in Virginia that were around, 180, 90s, all those years ago. And it's hard to really think about what the next 100 years are going to be like. But let's try. And even if you don't look at specifically 100 years from now, what would you like to see happen that would keep you interested in being a part of the Poetry Society of Virginia? How can we make it better for young people like you, make it more inviting and enjoyable?
So I do apologize if you hear dogs barking in the background. They're being really loud right now. But I envision for the next 100 or so years of the Poetry Society of Virginia is that we aim towards spreading poetry in middle and elementary school age groups. And I'm going to use PoetryCon as an example. The only people who showed up were the teachers. And I don't think that's my fault or a schedule's fault, because there's like 1,500 kids at Benton. I'm sure at least one kid could have showed up, but I think it's a lack of interest. It didn't hurt as much as expected, but poetry is a great tool and concept, not only just to release stress. It's a great thing for the mind too, because it makes you creative. It exercises your mind, especially in haikus, rhythmic poems, which I'm not the strongest in, which I'm trying to get better at. And the few times I remember writing a poem in my continuing 10 years of schooling was in 5th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. Even now in 9th grade, we only have 1 to 2 poetry units, and whenever we get to one, my fellow students are often annoyed and believe poetry is boring. And I believe that if we start holding seminars or age-specific poetry workshops like in elementary and middle schools, I believe it'll create more poets as we get older, because of course you can start writing poetry when you're older, but I feel like the interest in poetry starts when you're young, because I always liked it because they're always short, and I was never one for summarizing. I hated summarizing things, but poetry just came like that to me. And I believe it can come like that to hundreds and thousands of other little kids, and especially middle schoolers too, because that's a big changing part of your life, whatever people want to say. But I believe that if you introduce poetry like from kindergarten to 6th grade, you will make strong writers in 7th to 8th grade. And I think that's what's important for Poetry Society of Virginia. And even just holding seminars and stuff in schools, especially in high schools too, because I go to creative performing and fine arts high school. We hold stuff like that, but it's only for the kids in that program, which I'm not in. I'm in the orchestra program, but it's still equally as important all throughout your years at school and even into college.
Absolutely. And even before kindergarten, reading out loud to little children is a good way to get them started. But I completely agree with everything you said. And I think it's important that we give opportunities to write, but also read aloud poetry, and give up people opportunities to read and actually choose poets to read. We have a tendency to just present the poetry that's in the literature books or the reading books in school, and those are not the ones that are going to necessarily hit people with that awe that you have for poetry. But I think that there's poetry out there for everyone. I don't think it's something that has to be restricted to only certain kinds of people.
I definitely agree with that. I was forced to read aloud as a 3-year-old. My grandma would sit me down with like those learn to read books, and I would have to read like every word. in the book, which it made me a strong reader, made me a great writer. And I think writing is just a great tool for any age. I mean, even if they don't like it, they cannot like one style. They can like so many other styles. And I believe that it's important to emphasize writing at a young age because I don't remember learning like how to write stories and writing narrative essays and stuff like that. Like narrative essays, I didn't learn that until this year. I mean, we learned how to write like a little story about St. Patrick's Day in third grade, but that's really all I remember from elementary school. And it's just such a thing that I believe we should stress in the school system, especially poetry, because poetry is so overlooked. It's like there are so many like different genres and that are overlooked, but I feel like poetry is a big one that's the most important out of all of them.
Right. I taught for many years in Prince William County, and just in Virginia generally, poetry is no longer tested on the standards of learning. So it's one of the excuses people have for not spending time on poetry. It's a shame that they changed that. Although when they did include poetry on the standards of learning, oftentimes it was with multiple choice questions and answers that were not necessarily clear. In fact, I heard a story once that the poet herself did not know the answer to the question they put on a standards of learning test, and it may not have been a story from Virginia, so it could have been from another state, but just the concept that as a poet you don't know the answer to the question that somebody's written about your poem.
There's a problem.
That's the problem, absolutely.
And I'm gonna go along with Neil Hartberger. I'm sorry if I butchered your name, but I agree with him. Poetry is a learn to think concept because it's not straightforward. I mean, there are poems that are straightforward. Like for younger kids, I believe we should give them more straightforward, and as they get older, they get more harder stuff. Like I remember in 8th grade last year, there were some poems I had to sit there and think, and I would even have to ask questions. And then once Mr. Vincent would explain it to me, I'm like, I get it now because there's so many analogies and metaphors and imagery you can use in poems that like you could think it's one thing but it alludes to there's so many different interpretations of poetry, and I think we should teach that more because we get texts that are like historical texts and it's like there's nothing more to interpret here than what's written on the page. I believe if we get stories like poems or even prose poetry that we can learn, that we have to learn to interpret or learn to think, that would definitely make us smarter academically, and it would make us more well-rounded and make us more creative people because I don't see as many creative kids as I do now.
I think maybe you should make a public service announcement and we should get it out into the community.
That'd be awesome.
Eric, how about you with your future look at the PSV?
Well, I just want to come back to a great comment that Neil got us going on, was the whole concept of learning to think and use of metaphors. Robert Frost said that really life is constantly filled with metaphors. We just because they flow through us all the time in our speech. Then my wife pointed out to me once that metaphors is exactly how we learn everything. When I'm explaining to my grandson about something, I said, well, Emery, it's like this, but here's how it's a little different. And that's like a metaphor. And, like to like, but here's how it's different. And then learning expands. And so I think that's really important. Now, back to the question about the next 100 years. I really want to go back to this oral tradition thing. Because I mean, the original poetry was meant to be spoken. And if you can believe it, it was said that Homer really could speak. Now, he didn't do it all in one session, I'm sure, but speak in parts. But there were certain tricks like rhythm and rhyme. And I personally feel like hip hop has really saved American poetry with its emphasis on rhythm and rhyme. I don't use end rhyme so much, but I use internal rhyme a lot. And that's often used in hip hop. So, alliteration and assonance and internal rhyme are very strong with my work. And so, I circle out, but then I also come back to the iambic pentameter. So I'd like to see that. And the other thing is I wrote an odd little piece, 26 reasons why business majors should study poetry. And touching on Neil's point, one of it is learn to think. The use of metaphors, so important for learning in life. And you know, in business, they have this metaphor, oh yeah, we're in the red zone, which means they're about to close a deal. Well, that's a football metaphor for you're in the last 20 yards before you get to the goal line. And so metaphors just live throughout our life. And the other thing is that poetry forces you to be succinct and concise and short in what you're trying to say. And in a world where a lot of times these companies will charge by the page, it behooves them to write lots of words, and it just dilutes the whole thing, and it's not precise and concise. So yeah, but I would like to see a lot more. The Poetry Society in the last 2 years had 2 categories in spoken word, and the winners were members of the Black community. They came up, they didn't have the notes in front of them, they just gave it, and it was magical to listen to, I'll tell you that. So I would like to see a lot more of that in the Poetry Society.
Excellent. Zoe just wanted to add that she forgot to add on to what she was saying, but speaking poetry improves both speech skills and becoming less shy. She never read poetry in front of people until she went to the 2021 Poet Laureate Convention at Northern Virginia Community College. So that's absolutely wonderful.
Yes, that sorry to interrupt with that.
Yeah. Please.
Oh, sorry. That truly terrified me, speaking in front of all those people, especially adults. And my dad was there too. I hate reading poetry in front of my family. It's just a spoken thing with me. But I mean, I've only read poetry in front of a crowd not even that large twice, which was at the Poet Laureate Convention in 2021, and in front of the like 7 or 8, 9 adults at PoetryCon. I've never read my poetry. I mean, and besides the small Zoom we did when we were introducing all the young poet in the community winners, introducing ourselves. But I believe if we start, because when I was little, I used to act, and I loved being in front of, I loved like doing plays especially, and I was good at that because it's like I wasn't even myself. And that's how I feel when I read poetry to people that are not my family. But if we start at a younger age for reading in front of other people of all ages, especially at age 5 or 6, because 5, you're either the most energetic kid allowed in the world or you're super shy. And we need to change those shy kids into being talkative because it's a great social skill. And if you sit there and even if you have to look at the paper the whole time, I mean, I know the poems that I read at the Poet Laureate Convention by heart. Like I can recite it right now, but I just had to keep looking down at the paper because I didn't know what to do except to read it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's absolutely true. Okay, well, so now that I have you, how about you read your 3rd poem, and then Eric, coming back to you, and we'll just see how the time goes. Maybe we'll do a 4th.
All right, so this poem is called The Alps. I was in Germany, France, and England this year. Germany actually crossed in Austria while I was in the Alps, which was very fun. And the Alps it's like a beautiful mountain range. Probably everyone knows what the Alps is. I didn't until I went to Europe, but now I know. And this is a poem. It's a rhyming poem, so it took me some time to write it, but I really hope you all enjoy. In the fields and skies so blue, in the fields of green and skies so blue, nature's beauty comes into view. The rustling leaves, the gentle breeze, a symphony of sounds that puts the heart at ease. The vibrant flowers in colors so bright, dancing in the golden sunlight, the buzzing bees, the fluttering wings, nature's orchestra, a melody that sings. The towering trees reaching for the sky, providing shade as the time goes by. The babbling brooks, the rivers that flow, a soothing rhythm, a tranquil show. The mountains, majestic and grand, standing strong like nature's hand. The sparkling lakes reflecting the stars, a peaceful haven where worries are far. Nature's wonders so vast and wide, a source of joy, a place to hide. In the heart of the forest where secrets reside, where the sunlight dances through the leaves so bright. The melodies of birds, a sweet serenade, as they soar through the sky, their wings displayed. The river flows gently, a calm embrace, reflecting the beauty of nature's grace. Wildflowers bloom, a vibrant bouquet, their colors enchanting in every way. The mountains stand tall, guardians of the land, a sight so grand. The breeze whispers secrets in this language unknown, carrying stories of nature as it softly bloom. Oh, nature's wonders, so vast and profound, a sanctuary of peace where solace is found. Let's protect this precious earth we share, for nature's beauty, her infinite worth is beyond compare.
Oh, well done. I've read a lot of rhyming poems from students in middle and high school, and yours is exceptional because I don't hear the words being forced at all. So good for you.
Thank you.
Eric, would you like to read your third?
Sure.
And if I cut you off at all on your PSV thoughts, please add them.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I mean, I got 1,000 things going through my head about this topic. So the third part of my book really goes into issues like family, parents, children, siblings, and all that. So, and a lot of times I'll get a prompt, as I'm sure all poets do, or I'll hear a story from a friend, and it really touches me, and that turns into a poem. I mean, I heard this story, and I said, I have got to turn this into a poem right away. So it's about a woman who, her mother passed away, and the way she said it was her father was a man of very few words. So she really did not have much of a relationship, and she was trying to figure out a way, how do I build a relationship with my dad? You know, he's a widower, he's sad and lonely. I've got to build something with him. And what she did is just so astonishing. So you don't really have to know much about professional football to appreciate this poem, but here we go. The poem is entitled When the Steelers Play at Home. After mother's burial, father-daughter talk resembled a drive through blocks of steel towns, facades in disrepair, interspersed with vacant lots. She strains for a verb, a noun, a latch to catch. Oh, look, now there's a sale. Your mother used to shop there, Paula girl. See, everything must go. Sundays are his anesthesia for a memory banked by dying coals. Kickoff in the afternoon will steel his nerves. A boiled kielbasa on the TV tray, eating without relish, bathed in blue. And Paula, swelled with motherhood, adjusts her tray and lingers for an opening. She views the knockdown game of inches, averts her eyes from the slow-mo crackback replay. A new language is harder for adults. Horse collar, hash marks, naked bootleg, flea flicker, wounded duck, split the uprights, alligator arms, jailbreak, laces out. Mondays, she sips a mild tea as her index finger pioneers the sporting news. Roethlisberger, third and short, tight end on a crossing route, I'll bet. Paula girl, you got that right. Mom always stirred up cheese on chili for the half, then kissed me twice for luck. Want to watch next week? With a tight spiral off her front foot, she's found the open man.
Wow, that is a wonderful narrative. And you do a great job with the whole placing it in that football context. I really liked a latched catch. And I think that really defines a lot of situations where you're dealing with a person who's difficult to talk to, or where the moment makes it difficult to communicate.
You're right.
Excellent.
Yep. Thank you.
So we have enough time. Eric, why don't you go ahead and read another poem, and then we'll go back and let Zoe close us out.
Sure. That'd be great. Yeah, this is a poem I wrote about 10 years ago. It did get included in the book. My mother was kind of a bohemian. And so I grew up in central Massachusetts. And this is astonishing to think of. I'd never seen a black person until I was about 8 years old. So anyway, my mother set about trying to fix that. So this poem is true, and it's entitled Black Baby Doll. I was 6, my sister 3, a Western Massachusetts farm. Red barn angles, round stone walls heaved into balance by such diversity as Dutch, Norwegians, French, Finns, and a smattering of Greeks. Christmas, and outside was a heaved up sea of white, silent, motionless. As a gift for Natalie, a black baby doll in its snowy tissue paper creche, new rubbery smell, glassy gaze, short dark hair, pudgy fingers, especially its fresh mocha skin in pink baby doll pajamas. We peered and peered, heads touching, hands sniffing like country mice. Bemused, our mother watched without a word. She knew we had never seen someone black. James Baldwin would have to smoke another pack before we found him lounging on her bookshelf in our teens.
Wow. Really powerful. Ironically, my daughter asked for a Christmas present of a Barbie, and she asked for the purple Barbie. Of course, the purple one was referring to her beautiful gown.
Oh, yeah.
But she also happened to be the black Barbie. And it gave me pleasure to make sure Santa brought that particular Barbie, since I thought it was wonderful that what she saw was the purple dress and not the skin color at all.
Yeah.
It was an interesting experience. And thanks for including the Greeks.
Sure.
All right. Zoe, how about you closing us out?
This poem is not nearly as cheery as the other ones I read. I wrote this back in May 29th actually. And it's just it's not long, but it's not short either. So it's called Lethal Bee. The lethal bee buzzes past the young man's ear, whizzes across the bridge of a boy's nose. The lethal bee came from a man no older than your brother out on the field, exchanging punctures for a cause unknown. The lethal bee stings a newlywed, staining the grass he now lies on. No one likes the lethal bee, yet they're American-made house essentials. The fear and dread that I bestow of a lethal bee weighs heavy on my back, more than it should on a young adolescent. So many guiltless school children get stung by the hurtful lethal bee. Oh, please, lethal bee, stay away from me. And that's the end of the piece.
Well, I certainly can relate to being a little insecure when you start seeing the bees flying around.
Yeah, it's a metaphor towards a bullet, if you guys didn't get it. But that's what I was shooting for.
Okay. I think I need to read it one more time. Thank you. Thank you.
I can read it again if you want.
I kind of want you to. Does anybody mind? Yeah, okay.
I'll go for it.
Read it again.
Lethal bee. The lethal bee buzzes past the young man's ear, whizzes across the bridge of a boy's nose. The lethal bee came from a man no older than your brother out on the field, exchanging punctures for a cause unknown. The lethal bee stings a newlywed, staining the grass he now lies on. No one likes the lethal bee, yet they're American-made house essentials. The fear and dread that I bestow of a lethal bee weighs heavy on my back, more than it should on a young adolescent. So many guiltless school children get stung by the hurtful bee. Oh, please, lethal bee, stay away from me.
Thank you. It's very obvious when you're looking for it, but I think I was just in a kind of blur. So thank you for doing it again. Yes, and Denise Wilcox, who's been a teacher for many years, says, unfortunately, I understood it. And that is unfortunate for those of us who've been teaching. Well,
Yeah, it's a scary thing. And
yeah.
I think I actually got that term from a book. I cannot remember it's a very, very old book. It's my uncle gave it to me. I never finished and I can't remember the name, but it came from that. And I just remember I heard that term. I was like, I have to write a piece of poetry about that.
Yeah.
So I came up with that and I figured the first part was about it's a World War II book. So I picked it up from the World War II because there were so many teenagers that fought for our country. I mean, my great uncle, he was only 16 when he enlisted. He came back, thankfully. But three of my grandmother's uncles, they went out and they were all super young. And that's where I alluded to the part where a man no older than your brother or a newlywed, because there were so many of those. And when I visited Normandy in France, which is beautiful, I love Normandy more than I do Paris, to be truthful. And we visited the American cemetery. That just opened my eyes even more than researching had already had. We went to Omaha Beach and Utah Beach, and that just really, it was an eye-opening experience.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, Eric, you and Zoe both have been wonderful today. We've enjoyed your poetry and your conversation.
My honor and pleasure, that's for sure. Especially here, Zoe.
Absolutely.
You as well. This was fantastic. I loved hearing your poetry, Eric, and I loved sharing mine and sharing the answers to the questions we were giving. That was really fun.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Steve, for setting up the Zoom. And we will have a recording out. It will be sent to the people who run the Poetry Society of Virginia and the Virginia Poetry Online YouTube channels. Zoe and Eric, you'll get it from me as soon as I get it from Steve. But if anybody is anxious for it and you haven't found it on YouTube yet, just let me know. I'll put my email in the chat. And in December, we have Jay Deshay, who is a teacher at your school, so in the creative writing program for
Yeah.
poetry.
I remember reaching out for her for Poetry Con, but she was too busy, which is understandable. High school is 10 times busier than I thought it would be.
Yes, and they're going to be sharing the time likely with Lucille Elliott, who is a brand new young poet in the community. We have selected two based on the first deadline that we gave, but we didn't have a real good communication out there, so we have extended it to December 1st. So if you know other people who you think might be interested, you can also email me about that. So my email is in the chat, and if everybody wants to save the chat, you can do that, or you can get what you want from it. So thank you very much. Steve, would you like to add anything, or just?
Oh, thanks so much, Eric. So it was such a wonderful pleasure to have you share your poetry with us. It was truly a wonderful evening, and I think it's reflected in the chat. And you guys should go back and read it. It's truly a good tribute to you guys.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
So you're welcome to stop the recording, Steve, and then we'll